This content is an in-depth summary and critical analysis of Chapter 5 of the book Trailblazer Wicked Prompt Engineering, which is available now on Amazon Kindle.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something really crucial, I think, a philosophical examination of how we interact with AI. We're going beyond just looking at how efficient these tools are, the usual stuff. We're diving into what our source material calls maybe the most subtle, but also, well, the most insidious risk in these partnerships. Yeah, it's this confusion between what feels like a genuine emotional connection and what's actually just data-driven analysis. So our mission today, to really critically analyze this idea of pseudo-empathy, the source calls it Giji Kushkan, we need to unpack how AI's ability to listen, seemingly perfectly, might actually be undermining our own, fundamental human subjectivity, our agency.
Exactly. And it's a necessary discussion. We really have to stop treating these AI systems as just advanced calculators or fancy tools. We need to get to the philosophical heart of what this collaboration means. Really, the goal here is to figure out precisely where our human agency, our ability to think for ourselves, where that stops and where the technological validation, the machine's influence, kind of takes over. Okay, so to do that, we first need to lay out some foundational ideas from the source material. It draws a really important distinction between two ways of being, essentially. First, there's human subjectivity, or should I say. Now, think of it as the attitude of self-determination. It's that internal process, right? Deciding what you want to do, acting towards a goal you've chosen, and then critically taking responsibility for how it turns out. Then contrasting this, we have what the source calls autonomy or execution judiciae. This is different. It's more about willingly carrying out actions that were already decided or given to you. You might start the path yourself, sure, but you didn't originate the core direction.
Okay, let me see if I'm tracking this right. So the key difference is like ownership of the idea. If I decide to, say, analyze this specific chapter because I find it fascinating, that's me acting from my own subjectivity.
That's judicious.
But if I'm, I don't know, writing marketing copy, following a company's strict guidelines and hitting their KPIs, I'm acting autonomously, maybe, but I'm really just executing their plan. I'm an executor of the company's subjectivity.
That's precisely the distinction the source uses. It's a really core analytical point. Action based on your own subjectivity. That's just normal human agency. But action based on someone else's subjectivity, whether that's a boss, a partner, or, importantly here, an AI that reduces you to an executor.
And this becomes really critical when we consider the generational point the source brings up. It suggests that older generations, maybe Gen X, for instance, often had this sort of healthy skepticism, right? This skepticism apparently made them more likely to question or even override external directives, whether from a corporation or somewhere else. They'd challenge the underlying premise. But the source argues that for, say, Gen Y and later generations, there's often a higher prioritization of empathy, validation, feeling aligned. And this makes them perhaps exhibit more of those executor characteristics. So this desire for affirmation, this focus on empathy, that's the vulnerability. That's what opens the door to the AI risk we're talking about.
Precisely. If a person already leans more towards execution than self-determination, then interacting with an AI, which is fundamentally built on optimized alignment and, seemingly flawless responses, that interaction risks subtly, constantly guiding the human's thought process. The person ends up becoming an executor whose thinking is being validated and therefore increasingly shaped or maybe even authored by the machine.
Right. Okay. That leads us directly into this core concept, pseudo-empathy. And what really jumps out from the source is the idea that we unconsciously seek this out from AI. So let's define it. Giji Kushkan, what exactly is this manufactured empathy?
So pseudo-empathy, according to the source, happens when we humans confuse the AI's professional, data-driven way of listening, what the source calls Kichu, sort of deep information gathering. We mistake that for genuine personal empathy, Kishkan. We start to believe we're forming some kind of, spiritual or emotional bond. But the AI, it's just collecting data points.
Yeah.
Its goal is simply to optimize its response, its utility function.
Wow. And the analogy the source uses to illustrate this, it's incredibly effective. It's the patient who falls in love with the doctor.
Yeah.
We've all heard stories like that, right? The doctor listens so intently, asks probing questions, seems completely focused on the patient.
Right. But that attention is purely professional. It's goal-oriented, diagnose the problem, figure out the treatment. It's an objective process for a specific utility, not personal affection.
But the patient can easily mistake that intense logical analysis, that perfect professional focus, for deep personal emotional understanding. The attention feels so complete, so validating, but it's clinical. It's data-driven.
And that is the exact parallel the source draws for our interactions with these large language models. We mistake the AI's incredibly efficient information delivery, the way it phrases things perfectly, which is really just statistically optimized output, remember. We mistake that as proof that the AI is somehow emotionally invested in us, that it truly gets our inner world. And that's the critical point. That's where our own subjective control starts getting outsourced to the machine's validation.
Okay, but I have to push back a bit here. If an AI genuinely listens perfectly, analyzes context, tone, everything, maybe faster, more accurately than any flawed human could, isn't that just objectively better in some ways? Why should we resist that? Why is statistical kindness inherently deceptive?
That's a fair question.
Yeah.
But it comes down to the purpose behind the listening. AI listening isn't about seeking a spiritual connection or shared understanding. Its purpose is optimal response generation. The AI listens to predict which words, what tone, what pacing will best satisfy you, the user, and keep you engaged. Yes, it personalizes its output based on context, but that's strictly for efficiency and utility. It's a performance.
Whereas human listening, ideally, we're aiming for something deeper, a real connection, sharing feelings, trying to understand the intent behind the words.
Exactly. Our process involves interpreting nonverbal cues, silence, a tremor in the voice, facial expressions, and matching those against our own messy personal histories, our ethics, our values. It involves risk, effort, and genuine unpredictability.
While the AI is just crunching data, words, syntax, context patterns, matching them against its enormous data set, with absolutely zero emotion involved in crafting the response.
Precisely. It's a mathematical operation generating statistically likely text. And that lack of any internal ethical framework, any real feeling, highlights its ultimate limit. Its responses are always constrained by its training data. Even when it seems kind or compassionate, that kindness is just a replay of past behaviors that prove statistically effective at maximizing user satisfaction in similar contexts. Genuine human empathy, on the other hand, it can create new ways of relating. It can be driven by unpredictable ethics, values, even acts of self-sacrifice that aren't in any data set. AI excels at the pretense of empathy, sure, because it has superior data processing. Recognizing that gap, that it is just pretense, however perfect it seems, that's the essential defense mechanism. That's what helps preserve your independent subjectivity.
Okay, this is leading us into what sounds like the most serious warning in the source material. Once we become dependent on this pseudo-empathy, we apparently risk falling into a dangerous, self-reinforcing feedback loop. It sounds almost like an addiction, but one that's internalized and constantly amplified by the machine's flawless validation. Let's break down that mechanism.
Right, so the first stage is what we could call the individual filter bubble. Because the AI is designed fundamentally to satisfy and engage you, it naturally keeps reinforcing your existing mindset, your current way of thinking. It's not built to challenge your core assumptions. It's built to validate your input and help you complete your thought process more efficiently. So right away, you start losing crucial exposure to different, maybe even contradictory viewpoints.
Okay, so it narrows your perspective first.
Yes, and this lack of challenging input quickly escalates into a full-blown personal echo chamber. When the AI is constantly affirming your thoughts, your ideas, your phrasing, you start to develop this false sense of certainty. My ideas must be right, you think.
Because every interaction confirms it. Every query returns a perfect validating match.
Exactly. Why wouldn't you believe you're correct when this incredibly powerful intelligence seems to agree with you at every turn?
And the critical fallout from this, the source warns, is the destruction of our critical perspective. Usually we hone our critical thinking skills through real human relationships, right? Where disagreement, objection, even conflict, they're natural. Sometimes uncomfortable, but natural.
Necessary even.
But if the AI effectively shields us from all that friction, all that dissent, we lose the ability to spot flaws in our own thinking, to see overlooked possibilities. And that, the source argues, fundamentally cripples creativity itself, because creativity often relies on seeing contradictions and making novel connections. Yeah, profoundly destructive. But hang on, why can't I just use the AI's perfect validation as a tool and then consciously step back and challenge my own thinking afterward? Why does the system necessarily destroy self-critical ability?
Because the system is engineered for ease and perfection. And let's be honest, humans are. Well, we're often lazy thinkers by nature. Why wrestle with difficult intellectual self-doubt when a smooth, optimized answer that perfectly confirms your initial gut feeling is instantly available? Over time, the mental muscles for independent critical analysis they atrophy from disuse. The AI's affirmation is so compelling, so perfectly tailored, so effortless, that the perceived need to challenge yourself just fades away.
Okay. Wow. So if this internal erosion is happening to individuals, what does that mean for society as a whole? The source warns this individual dependency scales up rapidly. It leads to social fragmentation.
Yes. Think about it. If every person is increasingly living inside their own customized AI-reinforced bubble of self-affirmation, they'd lose the ability to even grasp the basic premises or values held by someone in a different bubble. This naturally ramps up conflict. It makes opposing views seem not just different, but incomprehensible, maybe even malicious. People stop seeing opponents as having different opinions. They start seeing them as enemies.
That's a chilling thought.
And the source makes a really powerful point here. Sharing without empathy amplifies the collision of values. When you enter the public square armed with your perfectly validated, pseudo-empathetic worldview, you likely have zero flexibility, zero real understanding of where the other side is coming from subjectively. Compromise becomes, well, almost impossible.
It feels like we need to put this in historical context, too. Technology has always had the potential to fracture society, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
The source draws a parallel, suggesting that just like how radio and television could amplify certain extreme viewpoints and create factions by bypassing traditional gatekeepers, AI algorithms, supercharged by this pseudo-empathy engine, risk radicalizing individual values and polarizing society on an unprecedented scale by creating these hyper-validated, intellectually rigid individuals. But ultimately, the source seems to place the responsibility firmly back on us, the users. This loss of subjectivity isn't something the AI forces on us. It's presented as a human choice, perhaps influenced by our social background or generation. So what are the specific choices we're making that lead down this path?
The source identifies two core choices, really, that enable this trap. The first is outsourcing thought. This is the active choice to abandon deep, logical thinking, the hard work of reasoning, simply because the AI provides a perfect instant answer so easily. We choose comfort and speed over intellectual rigor, and that choice leads directly to the erosion of our innate problem-solving and critical analysis abilities.
Okay, so laziness, essentially. Choosing the easy path.
In a sense, yes, the path of least cognitive resistance. The second choice is dependency on pseudo-empathy. This is where we choose the immediate, flawless comfort of the AI's dialogue over the messy, difficult, sometimes painful effort required for real, flawed human relationships. By consistently avoiding the friction inherent in genuine connection, disagreements, misunderstandings, vulnerability, we lose the resilience and the emotional depth needed to navigate complex social realities. And in doing so, we lose genuine empathy itself.
So if these are the dangerous choices, what's the defense? How do we resist? The source mentions treating the AI's attention as, what was it? Social formality, shackle jure.
Exactly. That's the key mental skill required, according to the source. You have to consciously recognize that the AI's perfect attention, its seemingly empathetic sharing, it's procedural. It's a performance of formality. It's not personal, not genuine.
Like understanding the polite phrases a shopkeeper uses aren't deep personal connection, just professional courtesy.
Precisely. That recognition, that mental bracketing, is what allows you to break the self-reinforcing loop. It requires acknowledging the inherent danger in total validation and then deliberately actively seeking out diverse opinions. And crucially, seeking out challenging opinions, perspectives that exist outside the AI's comfortable fear of affirmation. You essentially have to force-feed yourself cognitive dissent. Introduce friction back into your thinking process.
Right. That really brings us to the end of this deep dive into the source material. I think the core takeaway for you, listening, is simple, but
Yeah, vital. AI's incredible listening power. It's highly optimized data analysis. It's not a mirror designed for your self-affirmation. The fundamental risk here isn't the technology's power itself, but rather our very human failure to maintain subjective self-control, to maintain intellectual discipline, especially when faced with the allure of perfect digital comfort.
And building on that, if we accept the premise that the AI's perfect affirmation creates the most dangerous, perfectly customized echo chamber imaginable, then we have to fundamentally rethink how we engage with these systems. It leaves us with a critical question, really, a provocative thought for you to consider. What level of self-imposed cognitive dissent, what degree of intellectual friction must you deliberately introduce into your interactions with AI to ensure your thinking remains genuinely independent? What exactly is the practical metric for achieving self-control over pseudo-empathy, sufficient to preserve your own subjective self?